everyone, and welcome to this episode of the AWS for Games Boss Level podcast, where we seek to simplify and demystify how to most effectively use AWS technologies and offerings. My name is Chris Melissinos, and I'm the Principal Evangelist for video games here at AWS. And on today's program, we have three Senior Solutions Architects, Adam Hatfield.
Hey, everyone.
Tim Bruce. Erik Ynigo.
Thanks for having me.
And Principal Solutions Architect, Jon Bartlett.
Hey, hey.
All righty. Hey, hey, gang. So good to have you all here today. And we're going to be talking today about load testing, the importance of load testing on AWS. But first, we got to jump into what we're playing, right? It's about video games. Let's go ahead and have that conversation. Adam, I'm going to start with you. What are you playing, buddy?
So I tried to get into the Oblivion remaster for Elder Scrolls. I love that game. But my other game, which is currently the game of being a dad, is taking precedent. So hopefully this weekend I'll be able to get some more hours into it.
Yeah, and maybe they'll, we've been seeing all the announcements of everybody jumping into play, so they'll have some of that smoothed out for you by then too.
I hope so.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. And yes, the most important job is right on top of your brain. Good job, Dad. Good job. Tim, how about you, buddy?
So I've been playing this little indie darling called Schedule One. I don't know if anybody's
oh my
checked
goodness.
it out. Boy, the single person developer studio, gotta love like the content that one person can pull together.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, if anyone hasn't played Schedule One, check it out. It's
we don't condone anything in the game, but
right.
That's another story.
But Tim, it also reminded me back in the day when Palm Pilots first came out, and there was a little game called Drug Wars, and that just ate up everybody's time playing, which is really an economics and market simulation, which was just absolutely crazy. But yeah, Schedule One takes to a different level for sure. For sure. Awesome. Erik, how about you?
Well, I lost count on what attempt this is. Probably my ninth or 10th. I'm playing Terraria. I'm going for the 100% on everything, all the items, all the achievements. I always get sidetracked just trying to build stuff because I'm a builder at heart. But I'm going to try this time, and this one surely it'll be the one that I actually get everything on the game.
Yeah, another great game. My goodness, and such incredible staying power for that game. Right? It's how old now?
Oh, I don't know. It has to be what, like 15 years?
Yeah, at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
But amazing game too. Good one. Jon, how about you, buddy?
I am currently replaying Shadow of War because I still have yet to find anything that can compare to the Nemesis system they built. It was just amazing. So fun.
Yeah, that Nemesis system, we hear people talk about it every year at GDC too. It's like, how are you building Nemesis-like systems, right?
Yep.
But yeah, no, I get you.
Standard.
I know. Well, I've been going in and playing, there was a remake, a modern version of a game called iRobot, which was released by Atari back in the 1980s. This was the first polygonal game that was done. It was a little hard and obtuse to play. Jeff Minter, famed game designer, Yak, as he's known, he does these types of crazy remakes. He did like the Tempest 2000 and all of that stuff. Polybius, and he just did this iRobot one, and it's awesome. So I picked that up. And Blueprints. Have you all seen Blueprints yet?
No.
It is an insane game that is basically, imagine you're trying to solve a murder mystery in a house where every day that you go into the house, you lay tiles for how the rooms are all connected and what rooms are there. So the way I've described it, it's kind of like a roguelike deck building game where the deck you're building is the house that you have to traverse. So you can box yourself into corners, and it's so good. It's just insane. It is 100% recommended. It's right up there as one of my top games of the year, for sure. So, yeah, losing a lot of time to both of those right now. But yeah, awesome. Great. Well, great picks all around. And we're going to go ahead and jump in and start talking about the importance of load testing and how to do that most effectively on AWS. Jon, you'd be in the right position, since you are the principal solutions architect, to talk to us a bit about load testing and to go a little deeper than I just did. What is load testing?
Yeah. Load testing is really the practice of simulating traffic, ideally real world traffic, to understand your system's reliability and scalability. Some of the most common forms that we see are things like stress testing, in which you're hitting it with a lot of traffic to see how your system will handle heavy load. What's the first part that's going to break? What's the max number of users? That type of thing. Spike testing is another very common one, and that's really about really quickly scaling up that traffic and scaling it back down to see how does your system scale. Can you quickly spin up and handle a large number of users? And then also, does your system scale back down, or do you leave a bunch of infrastructure running that maybe you don't need? And then lastly is load or endurance testing or SOAP testing. And that's more of the long-term testing, leaving a steady state of traffic to look for things like memory leaks, or seeing maybe resources that will slowly fill up and hit capacity over time.
One thing I'd like to add to that too, Jon, is like people don't think about it, but you can also get value for understanding what the cost of your game will look like after you release it, if you get the number of users or players you're looking for. So that's something extra special that you can get from like budgets and just watching them during your load test.
Who else wants to jump in?
I'll jump in really quickly. I think it's really worth stressing out what Jon just said. Also, it's load testing is a very loaded word, right? So it means a lot of things to a lot of people. And what people most commonly think of load testing is what you were saying, Jon, stress testing, right? But we really need to push the point that load testing is an umbrella term for a lot of different types of load testing, right? Of testing, and depending on the properties that you want to test, you need to select the proper test to perform, right? So that's one of the main points that we really need to push, is that you need to understand what the customer or somebody means when they're talking about load testing, right?
Yeah, because the load testing comes, as you said, in a whole variety of different forms, right? Jon, you went through a bunch of them, and it could be, pressure testing your application, your service for things that you may not have even considered, like maybe there is an upper bounds to the number of users that can actually hit your database that you are not thinking about, or the type of infrastructures you're going to need. And then I think one of the big ones, and it's one of the areas that we at AWS really seek to help our customers with, is making sure that you are only paying for the resources that you actually need. Not having, again, idle cycle times, nodes up and running that didn't shut down for a particular reason. So this can uncover a lot of those things that can either create imbalances in terms of cost, it could create performance issues, or security issues, right? Things like DDoS attacks that come at your service and go in and bring it down, right? All of those are different types of load tests that would be important to test against, correct?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so we talked about some of the types of load tests, but what are some of the misconceptions about load tests? Do I really need to do that? My stuff seems to be pretty rock solid. Like, are there misconceptions about what load tests are versus what they are not, or why I should be doing it versus not?
Yeah, I see with startup game studios, a lot of times they see it as like too expensive, and then it takes a lot of work to get stuff like spun up. So that's a pretty common one I see in there. And then another one is just like, hey, the AWS services will just scale, right? And like a big reason you want to do load testing before like a game launch or like any type of like application launch, anything like that, is so that we can actually see like where your service quotas are set, right? Like doing a load test, you hit a service quota, cool. We now know like what to raise for like that big launch event. So that's like kind of like the three biggest ones I'm seeing with like startup studios right now.
Yeah, another big one I think is that they have a lack of time, right? So as you know, game studios operate under very tight development cycles and release schedules. And unfortunately, load testing is going to be competing against items like the latest content release, the latest feature release, maybe a hot fix being deployed. And the problem or the thing with those items is that those affect very measurable metrics, right? They move a needle in a dashboard or a number in a spreadsheet. And load testing, while the benefits are substantial, it's harder to quantify the benefits for that, right? So because of that, load testing often gets deprioritized in favor of these other items as well.
So what kind of guidance do we give our customer? I believe we've actually developed a guidance for load testing. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So usually when you're talking about load testing approaches, you fall into two categories, right? Either it's completely a black box solution that's going to force teams to integrate maybe tech stacks that they're unfamiliar with or they don't really want to bring into the system, or the other one is that they're completely from scratch, do what you must approach. So the guidance that we released kind of falls in the middle and tries to tackle that sweet spot, Chris, about offering opinionated guidance for the core functionality of load testing, but allowing teams to expand on areas using the tech that they already have in their projects, right? Maybe monitoring and or alerting or data persistence. You can expand on those using either the open source solutions that you already have, managed services on the AWS, but you can connect the dots as your team's expertise and your load testing strategy grows, right? So we released that strategy for that and a guidance for that. And so it's publicly available. And it's I feel like it's a really good starting point for teams that want to start developing their own strategy, but they don't know how. They need some direction, but they want to own it later on and start making tweaks.
So what size developer is this for? I mean, could this be really complicated? Is this for, an early stage startup? Is this for AAA studios? Like, who is this designed for, right? This guidance for load testing?
Yeah. I can jump in. I think the beauty of it is that it's built for a lot of size studios. The really massive studios probably already have this generally figured out. But this is something that's a serverless solution that makes it easy to get started quickly for even small studios. Or if you are a medium-sized studio, you have some more time, you can take it and tinker with it, tie it into your existing tools. And then again, even if you're a small studio and suddenly you become a medium or large size studio, like Erik mentioned earlier, it's very easy to build on top of it and really expand it and kind of evolve that architecture. So anything from a small studio to medium or even a large studio. But again, I think a lot of large studios probably already have their own setup.
Actually, just to go on that, I know a AAA that really just started getting going and they followed this architecture and guidance. So it can be for everyone.
Yeah. And good, please.
I was going to say that architecture is actually pretty easy to deploy, right? Again, it's just like our Kubernetes service, running serverless, and then using Locust, the open source load testing solution. Mm-hmm. So you can deploy that, and then instead of having to figure out how to scale the infrastructure, how to get everything set up, you can actually spend a lot more time on your scripting for the load testing event. So the scripting is probably going to be the thing that takes the majority of your time, and it should, right? You should be able to focus more on the type of test and how granular you want that test to be without really having to focus on the infrastructure itself. So that's one of the chief reasons why I take that to startup studios, just saying hey, if you're not sure about load testing, just start with this. Let us know if you have questions, and it allows them just really focus in on that scripting part.
You bring up a really good point, and it is a theme that seems to be, recurring through all the different podcasts we do, which is how do we abstract the complexity of massive, cloud infrastructure and all these different types of tools from the developer, so that way they don't need to become an expert in how to build that on the back end. They can just access these types of services or have guidances that help them to utilize this, so they can just spend more time focusing on the game, focus on art, story, environments, right, to make a better game. So how do we kind of obfuscate the complexity of that from the game developer, while still making it flexible enough to meet the demands they have that are constantly shifting? And, Tim, you bring up another point about AAA versus indies. A lot of times, if you talk to AAAs that are around for a really long time, there are some processes they may have that you're like, this is either outdated, outmoded, like, why do you still do this? And they're like, because this is the way we figured out how to do it when we started doing this. And so we know how to do it. So we can account for issues or things like that, and they continue to build forward. But this is an opportunity to then say, there's a better way to do this that we can help refactor for you and modernize those, those tools, those types of systems that you're using for better scalability, for cost savings, for better security, for all of these things. So just because they've been doing it forever doesn't necessarily mean they want to continue doing it. Sometimes they want to understand an easier path forward that is low lift, high impact, right?
Absolutely, right. And it's about getting out of your own way, right? You would spend time and energy with an engineer building that old infrastructure and keeping it maintained and everything, right? Do you want that engineer focused on that, or do you want an engineer focused on your game?
Yeah, getting out of my own way, buddy, that is a problem no guidance is going to be able to solve for us.
Like, I got to get out of my own way. That's all I can say.
And Chris, just because you know how to do something right now doesn't mean that you're going to know how to do it later on. Teams change, right? People leave, new people come in, tech stack change, stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's really important to also be validating that what you're doing makes sense, and if it doesn't, get with the latest, right? So I'll give you a quick story. Like when I was on developer land, when I was actually doing games, whenever we wanted to load test a new feature, right, we had to go through central tech. We had to make reservations for the load generators. Sometimes some of them would not work, so the load that you were expecting to generate was going to change, and it's going to take a while to get another one. You had to clean up the mess that the previous team left on the machine. You had to go through, a terminal multiplexer like TMUX to operate on all of them and patch things up. So it was kind of hassle, right? And it's gotten so convenient nowadays, where you just spin up a machine and deploy everything, that there really isn't a reason not to do it. And a lot of I see a lot of people also thinking that just because they're load testing the big games with millions of concurrent users and for hours and hours, it doesn't mean that you need to do that exact test, right? Even a very low test with a few hundred users or a couple thousand concurrent users for 4 hours is going to help you validate that architecture, right? That scalability, find those performance issues, those bottlenecks. So there really isn't any good reasons not to do tests like that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it used to be the load tests before we were able to automate some of this stuff was, all right, this is going to be a family and friends alpha or beta build. You're going to get people in. And it always reminds me of a comment that Chris Taylor, who did Total Annihilation, right, back in the day, and he would say, the problem with getting real people testing is you have a path that you want to go ahead and kind of beat up and then, kind of figure out how to make it, hardened, right? And he's like, and then you get everybody to start testing. And then they're like, can I blow that up? How about this? Can I take care of it? Can I, knock this thing over? And he's, no, we need you on this path, And so you're pressure testing the game live against all of these random variables, right? This gives you the ability to automate some of that and have control over the types of things that you're testing to understand how to go and fix them correctly and not surface other bugs or issues before you've surfaced the ones you were testing for, right? So automating this is super important. Right?
And to somebody's point, I think Adam, you were mentioning about the you were mentioning the script, the quality of the script. It's really important also to notice that the insights, the quality or how good the insights from a load test you're going to gain are going to be directly proportional to how accurate your script reflects the way it's going to be used, right? Yep. So it doesn't mean that if you don't know how it's going to be used, you shouldn't try to attempt to perform a load test. Any data is better than no data, but you really need to put some thought in that script and actually develop a sequence that you intend your users to go through, right? Like the core loops, like the first user experiences or the first purchase or the first battle, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And one other thing to throw out there as well, Chris, your story kind of made me think of it is, there are a lot of studios that will take that friends and family approach, but we're also in the age of a lot of studios being acquired. And if you are looking to go that path, having a load testing solution that is built on a standard solution so you can actually demonstrate and show people what you're doing, it adds value. If it's just hey, yeah, we got this kind of guy that runs a couple of scripts, it's much tougher to really show your capability. So it's also an interesting perspective as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, all that is like the game changer, right? So like if you can just like approach that from just kind of like a CI/CD standpoint, and like we're versioning scripts, we're deploying them, and we're continuously updating and learning from like every test, like that's when like the value like really shows up. So it might be like a little hard to get everything set up initially, get your scripts spit out, but then once you're there, right, you just start doing that iterative process, and that's when you get a lot more value out of it.
Well, I mean, okay, so yes, that's when you get that value out of it. But if I'm a developer sitting here listening to this right now going, all this sounds great. I have a guidance I'm going to be able to follow. I'm not a big student, but maybe I've worked on some of those big games, and now we're starting to develop our game. Like, how early should I be thinking about load testing? Is it something that I have to say, okay, vertical slice is done, or we're going to be heading into a beta? Let's start load testing. Like, how early should developers be thinking about load testing in their kind of build, run, grow pipeline?
So my guidance for like startup studios has always been like load test early and often, right? So like I generally tell them like at least if we're going to start like this year doing like alphas, right? Like start doing load tests when you start doing those alphas, right? Because you don't want like an alpha weekend to be interrupted by not being able to onboard players like into the game, right? And then as you're like leading up to like your main release, or like open beta, anything like that, like 6 months prior is generally I say like you start doing this stuff 6 months prior. You're collating that data. It gives you enough runway and time to start making changes at that point. So like start doing them like right before your private alphas, and then like 6 months before like your main launch is like my general guidance. And that works out for a lot of those studios really well. And that's just like my preference, like with my startup customers too.
No, I think often, early and often is a great way to approach it. And again, it doesn't need to be the same scale of load test, right? Like maybe you're just load testing on a smaller scale because you incorporate a third-party library somewhere that you just want to understand what the boundaries are. And like Adam is saying, maybe when you're going to beta, that the scale of the load test is going to be substantially larger, stuff like that. But there's really a lot of benefits in every stage of the development process to do appropriate load testing, right? Not going full out, thousands and thousands, but rather, taking a smaller approach and your multiple flows, your multiple architecture flows. And I think teams get a lot of value out of that.
And to add to that too, like you can start making better informed technical decisions, right, on your architectures. So like we'll pick on DynamoDB, for instance. DynamoDB will scale for our customers and scale immensely for our customers. The challenge is that you can make a really bad or a really poor decision on how you're going to use DynamoDB, and your bill is just going to go up and up and up and up over time. You can identify things like that early via load testing. So when you start talking about like, well, maybe I'm losing money on load testing, I'm spending money on load testing, you can actually save money on your game by identifying problems that cost you money and reducing that impact long term. I actually know a couple of customers who did that. And one was thinking about refreshing a store nightly for all their players. So they started testing the back-end services. And what they noted was like, wow, our DynamoDB costs go through the roof because everybody's hitting the store all at the same time. Then they went back and they like scaled it out over a few hours for the players on the back end. And like, wow, their costs went down like a magnitude of like 4 times. It was really cool to see that identified early instead of releasing that way and then going, oh, our game costs too much money.
Yeah, so I guess a good way to think about this, right, is that's the flip side of the coin that we were talking about, which is the outward facing, kind of getting pressure on this, but then also figuring out, how do I have this structured? How am I asking for information? Are there things I can be doing to create efficiencies in this to reduce that dependency, right? So this is really about pressure testing, load testing, database usage, service quotas, right? These sorts of things to understand that it may be one thing if your game is up and running and it's handling this barrage of access fantastically. But if it's driving this cost out of control because you haven't structured that correctly in the back end, this will surface that early, right? And potentially save you not just a lot of money, but potentially save, your small studio with a great idea from not being able to keep with those costs and having to shut down, which we have seen in the past, right? From an industry perspective. So test, right, is super important. And of course, this guidance will be able to go and help you understand how to do that on AWS effectively.
Another thing that I want to touch upon the guidance, Chris, is that there's also a component there that we haven't really talked about is the actual load testing framework, right? So that is the client that's going to generate or execute your script and generate all the calls to your service. And what I do want to mention is that there are many different kind of frameworks, right? Some of them have, there's specific pros and cons. So you need to be able to choose that properly. Some of them are going to require the test to be written in a specific language. So might as well align that with the proficiency of your team. Some of them are going to support different protocols. So you need to make sure that what you're trying to test is supported, stuff like that. And the good thing about the guidance is that part, which the load testing framework that we chose by default is Locust, is an industry standard. But it can be easily swapped by anything else. So you can just put just as easily JMeter, you can put NGrinder, you can put SIGs or any other of these load testing frameworks, and the rest of the guidance remains the same, right? You're just changing one component, which is the load generator part, and away you go, right? Just to align that with the expertise or what your team is more confident with.
Very cool. And by the way, this guidance that we're talking about, we're going to make sure that we have the link to that in the show notes. So we're not going to leave you having to search around our site to go ahead and find this stuff. We'll make sure you have access to all the stuff that we're talking about here today, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's talk a bit about, some of the, like announcements that we've made, right, at AWS. One of them I'm going to bring up is the 100 million CCU game lift announcement that was done about a month and a half ago, right? And, it's one of these things where we are pressure testing and load testing the services that we offer you to make sure that we're meeting the expectation for a massively growing and important segment like the games industry. Huge gamer, long time. We'll talk a bit about let's talk a bit about that announcement and where load testing would kind of fit into something like testing against 100 million CCUs on a service like GameLift.
Oh, I'll jump out really quickly.
Oh, look at that. Stumped the whole panel.
Well, I'll get it started, Chris. I just want to say that we understand how ridiculous that number is, right?
Yes.
100 million concurrent users. There's no game or that's currently close to that, right? So the fact that we're trying it at that scale really means that we're looking into the future, right? To support those teams and those games that eventually are going to reach that milestone.
Yes, and we did talk about that number on the Boss Rush podcast, not Boss Level, Boss Rush with Dean Takahashi and Mark DeLore and Susan Cummings, and of course my good longtime game industry friend Mark said 100 million. I want to talk to you about that number. I said yes, 100 million, right? And all the session-based games running concurrently on our infrastructure, not all within one world. We are not there yet as an industry, as from a technology perspective anywhere, right, of doing that. But think about what happens when, you start looking at the rise of continued web games, right, and using WASM and things like that to then reach in a frictionless manner potentially 1 billion people that want to play. If you start having that type of traffic coming in, as small as those packets are going to be, how do you start testing against that, right? Across a global infrastructure. So anybody that's up to the challenge of bringing 1 billion person game, we'd love to work with you. But in all seriousness, right, you want to go ahead and press those large numbers to make sure that if we can deliver the performance, security, and reliability at that scale, we're going to be there to meet the demand that you have for your games, for your customers, as you bring those games to the world. So that's why we do those things at that scale, to ensure that we can service again, our customers, partners, and most importantly, the players correctly, right?
Yeah, there are plenty of game developers that are surprised themselves when they launch and suddenly they have 1 million people in their game and they were expecting 10 to 20,000. So, it's one of those things where you're like, I don't have to test for that. But I mean, if you have that opportunity and the system falls over, now it's an opportunity lost. But if you're ready for it, let the good times roll.
Jon, I will tell you, there still is a very popular MMO that launched in the early 2000s. And I remember when they launched, they had not scaled or sized this appropriately or did that type of load testing. They had to pull the product out of retail channels for 3 weeks. So they had enough time to get more overbuild into colos to actually turn it back on for people that that wanted to go ahead and play and jump in. So people that got in early enough had this 3-week head start of building in the world, right? And so we want to avoid those types of things. Test before you launch. That's what we're here to help you do.
Yeah. And you also know that, on those 3 weeks, not everybody came back to the game, right? So it's a lost opportunity as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one thing is like, hey, we tested up to like 100 million CC on Game Lift, right? Some studios are gonna be like, well, what should I be testing for? Like, I generally tell like the studios I work with, you kind of just want to do a phased approach of like go 2x, 4x, 8x, 10x of like what's your most hopeful CCU count, right? Like, hey, we think like max, like we'll have 100,000 players playing this game at any one time. Cool. Go ahead and load test that infrastructure for 200,000, 400,000, 800,000, a million. Because then to Jon and Chris, your point, like if your game does pop, it goes viral. At that point, hey, we've already done like the heavy lifting kind of upfront, and we know that platform can like sustain that level of players.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easy to update your architecture to handle those loads. Like, if you run those tests, sometimes it already works or there's some minor tweaks. It's not like you suddenly necessarily have to overhaul your architecture to be able to handle that. So yeah, absolutely worth testing it, seeing where you're at, and just being ready.
Yeah.
Or just filing a ticket and saying, I need a new quota.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, something as simple as that, right? Of course. So maybe we can talk a bit about, partners and third-party solutions that developers may want to look at too when they're building out to kind of their testing strategy.
Yeah. I think it really comes down to where you're at from a resources and team perspective. We have our guidance where if you want to go and start playing with things, you can. But it's also a matter of, hey, maybe you have the funds, but you don't have the time. That's where you could lean on teams like AWS Professional Services or partners to get some additional hands-on keyboard to come in and help you build this stuff out. Or maybe you want to go the SaaS route where there's tools like BlazeMeter out there, where it's just something that's easy, web-based, and just runs. So I think it really kind of boils down to where are you at and what are the resources you have to use and where are you hitting those constraints?
Yeah, I have customers that run the gambit of like, hey, they're going to roll their own. And then I have a lot more that are using partners, but they use partners in a couple different ways, right? Like I have customers that use partners just to build out the scripting for their load testing events. And then I have other ones where it's like full white glove. They build out the scripting, they spin up the load testing infrastructure, they run the test for you, compile all the results for you. So we have a lot of different options just between like, hey, if you want to go at your own route, cool, we have our guidance. And then we have a lot of partners that can, help in one aspect or another for load testing in general, or they can just do the whole thing for you.
Yeah, so to that point too, with regard to developing scripts, right? It's making sure you're not just thinking about load testing, but really understanding what you need to be testing. It's not just everything, right? There may be certain pieces of your offering, of your game, of your architecture that you need to hammer harder than you think, right? So making sure that you have the right partner, the right guidance to help you understand how to build those scripts are going to be, it's going to make the process and the result that much better, right? So you have to put in a little bit of that work up front.
Additionally, there's a piece that we often leave out, and it's a community. We all know the games community just loves to talk to each other. We love to get customers talking to each other. So if you have questions about, like, I'm developing a load test, we can also maybe arrange a customer contact for you to reach out to and, understand what they did. What did it take them? What partners they might have used. So you don't have to like feel like you're, digging the hole in your backyard the first time. You can go and find somebody who's already dug that hole and give you some pointers of how you can do that best.
And I think also that's where, like Erik mentioned, we have Locust as part of our built guidance, and there's other tools out there like JMeter, which these are large open source tools. Open source communities are amazing to just go out there, and there's all kinds of stuff that's already built. And so you don't have to do the basic work. You can get a lot of pre-built stuff, then you can just focus on the fine tuning and really dialing in, Chris, to your point, and Erik, you mentioned it earlier, getting as close as possible to real world usage, because you really need to actually test the various aspects of your game, your architecture. And so that's where leaning on those communities, excellent point.
Yeah, and also as your game becomes more and more of the final version of your game, you're going to be able to maybe run internal tests. You can record that traffic, for example, and you can use that traffic to help you create your script as well, right? So you don't also have to start from scratch. If you actually have some sort of data to go with, you can base it off that, and it'll be even more accurate than just trying to create that script from scratch, right? So there's strategies and there's tools that falls a little bit outside the scope of this conversation, right? But you can just record your HTTP traffic and stuff like that, and then just maybe convert those calls into a script in whatever language and whatever framework you're using for, and it will start you over from a really good spot.
Yeah, I mean, all excellent advice. And you actually just triggered another thought for me here, Erik, something that you mentioned before about those players that may leave when a game isn't operating correctly. You're not going to get them back. When you talk about cost savings, right, you may be looking at, the pressures that we now have in the games industry to deliver content faster, right? We had 18,000 new games show up on Steam last year alone. We're not just competing with other games, you're competing for share of time, right? You're competing for these kind of shared slices of content, and everything from, short form video to music and all these other things. And so you may think, well, what is the cost of me spending time doing that testing? It's not that cost. It is the overall cost of not testing for this. That is really the side you want to look at, right? It's kind of like nobody needs a fire extinguisher until you need one. And then when you need one, it's 100%, right? So you need to think about it this way. You are investing in the stability of your game for it to become a hit. And if it's not that game, what about the next game, right? And nobody can predict the virality of games as much as people want to. We just can't, right? Because it's about taste, and it's about the culture and what sits in the zeitgeist and all these things. So making sure you're taking that time to effectively test this will save you an overall cost in the long run by having a service that can meet that unexpected demand that we want you to have. Well,
there's different kinds of costs, right? Now that you're talking and getting into that, right? And, when there are certain mechanisms in games that are going to drive a lot of people really quickly, right? Or hopefully, so limited time deals and, a raid that's going on or whatever, right? And losing on servicing those people, or maybe even toppling the infrastructure and getting that down cost is going to be really costly, or getting to re-engage those users, that reacquisition cost is also going to be insane. So many different ways of looking at those lost opportunities and those different kind of costs that is going to add up to much more than if you just spent, a little bit of time just load testing and making sure you can service that influx of players.
Yeah. It's a really good point, because I think, a lot of folks think, load testing so that I can see when my game is going to fall over. But it's also a matter of, what if you don't scale down properly? What if you do hit 1 million players and then everybody starts logging off and you don't scale back on your servers? That's a lot of extra cost. Or what if, your achievement system fails? Now it's not just we're talking about money. We're talking about you have to go and figure out how to make all of your players whole, because maybe your achievement system wasn't actually giving people their appropriate achievements. So there are just so many ways that certain aspects of your architecture falling over or not scaling properly can cost you in time and money. And again, it's just, with some of these open source tools and the guidance we have and everything, there's a lot of ways of just checking that box, making sure you've at least got the basics covered, and just avoiding those issues altogether.
It's also going to make for a more optimized and performant code base as well. Like the benefits are many, Chris. It's going to let you figure out if, hey, this is an unbatched call to a database that, is running me. For example, to Tim's point previously with Dynamo, we actually experienced that as well, right? We have a table where you would just store a JSON representation, a string, and it just kept growing and growing, and they were just changing one little field in that entire JSON. And as you know, Dynamo doesn't do partial writing and stuff like that, right? So you're consuming all that capacity. It's just going to force you to take a better look at your code, optimize it better, and basically make a better product.
Awesome. The one thing to take away from here is testing. Test early, test often. Make sure you build a robust testing strategy. The guidance that we offer will help you get on that journey. And of course, you have any other questions, you can always reach out to your AWS, colleagues. You can go ahead and hit the different communities that are using this as well. And we're happy to go ahead and help you on that journey. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Boss Level. I want to thank my guests here today, my fellow presenters, Adam, Tim, Erik, and Jon. Thanks, guys, very much for your time today and for helping to educate our customers on the importance of load testing on AWS.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, y'all.